Hello, everyone. Thanks for listening. My presentation is entitled A Vignette Approach to Understanding Cultural Identity in a Maya Community in Mexico, and it's based on data I've been analyzing with two undergraduate students at UC Santa Cruz, Sonia Dominguez and Patricia Flores Rosas. The red star on this map of Mexico represents the Maya community where this research takes place, Zinacantan, a Tzotzil-speaking municipality in the highlands of the state of Chiapas. Zinacantec cultural identity is on full display in this photograph I took in 2009. These are high school students getting ready to march in the community parade for Fiestas Patrias, a national holiday in Mexico, which is like the 4th of July in the United States. Youth at this time carried on the Zinacantec cultural identity in many ways, including through their traditional dress, the bright blue floral shawls, skirts, and ponchos weaved and embroidered by girls and women in the community. Off in the distance, perhaps less central to their core identities, are Mexican flags, a symbol of their connection to Mexican Spanish-speaking culture, which is a relatively recent aspect of their cultural identity. Before the 1970s, Zinacantan was a subsistence farming community that had very little contact with Mexican society. Living in extended patriarchal family structures, most men cultivated corn while women made tortillas and weaved clothes. Men at the time dressed in white ponchos with red tassels and shorts, as you see in these photos. Few spoke Spanish and not many had been to school. By the time I began research in Zinacantan in 2008 and 2009, the community had become more intertwined with Mexican society and globalization. The center had become pretty populated. Taxis were going back and forth to the Mexican city of San Cristobal, and there was a new middle school and high school for Zinacantec adolescents, all conducted in Spanish with Mexican teachers. The traditional clothing became more elaborately embroidered and colorful. However, I only observed girls and women wearing the traditional clothing on a daily basis. These adolescent boys I photographed in 2009 put on ponchos over pants just for special holidays. In 2010, a communication tower went live in the community, bringing cell phone service and the internet to Zinacantan for the first time. When I returned to Zinacantan in 2018, almost all adolescents and many adults were using mobile devices and the internet. In this photograph, an adolescent girl shows her grandmother a photo circulating through the community WhatsApp. The adolescent is not wearing the traditional clothing, but her grandmother is. So what have been the impacts of these forces of globalization on Zinacantec adolescents' cultural identity? Cultural identity in the context of globalization has mostly been studied within the theoretical framework of acculturation, with multicultural identity being measured in terms of how people label themselves as members of a national or ethnic cultural group. So for example, I label myself Italian American. According to this research, there are different ways to manage multiple social group identifications. One can compartmentalize or alternate between different identities in different contexts, for example, being Zinacantec in some situations and Mexican in others. Or one can blend multiple identifications to construct a novel, hybridized, integrated sense of self. For example, being Zinacantec Mexican across contexts. But what exactly does it mean to be or feel Zinacantec or Mexican or Zinacantec Mexican? To understand the content of cultural identity, we can examine people's cognitive schemas, that is, their interpretive frameworks, such as beliefs and values associated with being a member of a particular social group and worldview. Schemas have been identified or defined in cultural cognitive anthropology as learned patterns of thought feeling that mediate interpretation of ongoing experience and reconstruction of memories. Over the course of development, perhaps particularly in adolescence, we construct networks of associations, beliefs, values, and ideological frameworks that guide our behavior as defined by our membership in a particular social or cultural group. To get at the content of cultural identity, I developed a series of 8 vignettes through my ethnography in Zinacantan in 2008 that asks research participants to interpret various social relations, such as the nature of gender and gender relations, courtship, and adolescents' relationships with family and peers in the transition to adulthood. I presented high school and non-high school adolescents with these vignettes in 2009. So adolescents in high school and adolescents who discontinued their education after elementary school. And I aimed to test whether the introduction of Western forms of schooling in the community was shifting their beliefs and values toward weird perspectives, that is, Western, educated, individualistic, rich, and democratic perspectives. Each of the vignettes depict 2 people disagreeing, One character voices a traditional Xenocontec perspective from before the 1970s, and one character voices a weird perspective. The character with the traditional Xenocontec perspective endorses beliefs and values for interdependent gender hierarchy, complementary and ascribed gender roles, family-mediated social interactions, and family obligations. The character with the weird perspective endorses beliefs and values for gender independence and equality, chosen and equivalent gender roles, individually mediated social interactions, and personal fulfillment. To give you a sense of these vignettes, this is the gender roles vignette, and it goes like this. There's a family in Xenocantan, Juan and his wife named Maria, and they have 3 children. Juan's mother also lives with them. Maria has relatives in San Cristobal who want Maria to work for them in their house in the mornings. They're going to pay her, but Juan doesn't like the idea. He says, if she goes, who's going to make the tortillas then? Maria says that Juan's mother can make them, but Juan says it's not the same. It's better that the woman of the house makes the tortillas. Which is better, what Juan says or what Maria says, and why? So this vignette came from a true story that I had heard in Xenocantan, and it really captures the cornerstone of traditional Xenocontec womanhood and the marital relationship that is symbolized through the woman, the wife, making the tortillas and handing them to her husband at mealtime. So responses to these vignettes can be analyzed both quantitatively and qualitatively. If participants agree with Juan, we can assign the response a 1, representing traditional Xenocontec worldviews. If participants agreed with Maria, we can assign the response a 3, representing a weird worldview. If participants agreed with both characters, we assigned it a 2. So we have a 1 to 3 scale. In addition, qualitative analyses of participants' responses to the why question can further illuminate the cognitive schemas that adolescents are constructing as they grow up with exposure to multiple cultural worldviews. This study in 2009 showed that indeed schooling was associated with greater endorsement of weird perspectives. So people tended to endorse the characters in the stories that were advocating for gender equality in this case, and independent and equivalent gender roles, both the father and the mother earning money for the family. So when I returned to Xenocantan in 2018, 8 years after a communication tower was installed, I presented these vignettes once again to a new cohort of adolescents to see if youth became even more aligned with weird perspectives due to the increasing presence of Western values and beliefs through technology and social media. This slide provides a description of adolescent participants in 2009 and those in 2018. In 2009, there were 80 adolescents, half of them were girls. On average, they were 17 years old, and on average, they had 7.7 years of schooling. In 2018, there were 79 adolescents, 44 girls, on average 16 years old, with about 8.4 years of schooling. So you can see the communication tower came in to the community in between these 2 samples. I averaged participants' endorsements of characters across all 8 vignettes for an average score, and then conducted a one-way ANCOVA to determine if the average responses to the vignettes was significantly different across cohorts, controlling for age, years of schooling, and gender. As you can see, the average was not very different between the 2009 and 2018 cohorts. On average, both samples tended to have a mixed response to the vignettes. Age and gender were not associated with responses to the vignettes. However, years of schooling was significantly associated with responses. Those with more schooling leaned more towards weird perspectives on the scale. However, one problem with this average is that it masks variations across the vignettes. Cultural change is unlikely to happen evenly across all different kinds of social relations. And indeed, some vignettes elicited more weird perspectives, some vignettes elicited more traditional Xenocontec perspectives. In addition, some may be critical of the 1 to 3 scale. Is it really a continuous measure of cultural identity alignment? It might be better to think about these responses as categorical and either aligning with traditional, weird, or mixed responses. And so what I did was created this table to show the number of adolescents who endorsed traditional, mixed, or weird perspectives in 2009 and 2018 separately by each vignette. The vignettes that most frequently elicited traditional endorsements are in red: the gender roles, the courtship, and the girls' pure relations vignettes. As you can see, there's a greater frequency of endorsements of characters with more traditional perspectives for the vignettes in red. The vignettes that more frequently elicited weird endorsements are in blue. The gender status vignettes and the pathways to manhood and womanhood had higher frequency of endorsements of characters with weird perspectives. And as you can see, the patterns were very similar across the 2009 and 2018 cohorts before and after the communication tower. So vignettes that leaned traditional in 2009 were also the ones that leaned traditional in 2018. Vignettes that leaned weird in 2009 were also the ones that leaned weird in 2018. So in other words, participants were more likely to adopt a gender equality worldview in response to a story. The gender status vignette, this is a story about men walking in front of women versus side by side. They were also more likely to adopt a weird worldview when it came to prioritizing personal fulfillment over family obligations. And these two vignettes about young women and men pursuing education and careers outside of Zinakantan. On the other hand, adolescents were more likely to maintain a traditional Zinakantek perspective of ascribed and complementary gender roles, family obligations in matters of adolescent girls' peer relations, and family-mediated courtship. In addition, there were two vignettes that tended to elicit mixed responses, the mixed gender relations vignette and the boys peer relations vignette. You can see in that both the 2009 and 2018 samples, there were higher frequency of mixed responses, two responses for both of these vignettes. So in response to the mixed gender relations vignette, participants often voiced the importance of girls and boys managing their own relationships, friendships, but only in the context of broader community supervision, for example, in the context of school where there are teachers and other people around. In response to the boys peer relations vignette, participants often voiced the importance of boys dividing their time between their obligations to their fathers and their personal fulfillment through school and friends. So it could be that these topics, it's easier to overcome, to come to a solution that blends traditional Zinakantek and weird perspectives. So given evidence that a blending identity style or a hybridizing identity style is a more psychologically adaptive response to globalization and multicultural identities, I have begun qualitatively analyzing these mixed responses to understand how adolescents might be integrating contrasting perspectives to construct new meanings for Zinakantek cultural identity. What I'm finding in this qualitative analysis is that the alternating and hybridizing styles of meaning making are appearing in the reasons adolescents give for their mixed endorsements. So for example, this is the boys peer relations vignette. It goes like this. Manuel is a boy studying at the high school in Zinakantan. He spends his days studying and playing basketball with his friends. Manuel's father doesn't like it that his son doesn't help him to work, only studying and playing. Manuel says, I don't want to work. I'm still young, and this is a time for young people to study and have fun. Who is right, Manuel or his father, and why? So here is one adolescent's response to this vignette. Marisol, a pseudonym, endorses traditional and weird perspectives by partitioning the day, compartmentalizing the day. There's time to study, there's time to play, and there's time to fulfill family obligations. So rather than addressing Manuel's weird perspective of self-fulfillment and reconciling it with the father's traditional Zinakantek perspective of family obligation, Marisol divides the two consciousnesses. One is for the morning and one is for the afternoon. In contrast, second adolescent, Marcos, also a pseudonym, says, it depends on what they decide, if he wants to continue to study or if he wants to begin to look for work to help the father. What I would like for him to do is to continue his studies so that he can help his father even more by finding a good job. So in contrast to Marisol, Marcos, there's greater elaboration on the importance of individual choice, but through a joint collaborative decision-making process between father and son. Marcos specifically says it depends on what they decide together. So collaborative individual choices. Marcos further integrates the two cultural worldviews by selecting only the studying part of school, not the fun with friends part of school, and reformulates it as an activity that is an investment for future enhanced family obligations. So this is very much a work in progress. I've only just begun analyses, but I hope I've provided some insights into the ways that cultural identity content can be measured through the interpretive frameworks people use as members of particular cultural groups to guide their evaluations and potentially behaviors. In addition, my research shows how changes in cultural identity content due to globalization may be uneven across different types of social relations. Traditional ideologies in Zinakantan seem to have more tenacity in some social relations versus others. I found, for example, that gender division of labor in the home and the protection of girls represented social structures in Zinakantan that are more resistant to change compared to overt displays of gender hierarchy and adolescents' obligations to the family as they prepare for adult roles. My data also suggests that the alternating and hybridizing approaches to multicultural identity are not just characteristics of individuals, some having one identity style, others having a different identity style. Instead, these two approaches may vary across different structures of social relations, and it may help us to understand why there's this unevenness in cultural change. So the next steps in this research involves more qualitative analyses on the reconciling strategies and schemas that adolescents may be creating by blending interpretive frameworks from traditional and weird cultural worldviews. I also have quantitative data on 2018 adolescents' social media use. So I plan on testing whether social media use is related to adolescents' alignment with traditional versus weird perspectives in their worldviews and cognitive schemas. So thanks so much for listening. I look forward to a rich discussion and feedback on my research in the symposium. I want to thank my research assistants, Margarita Perez de la Torre and Mariana de la Torre Sanchez and Susana Daniels. I also want to thank the Committee on Research from the University of California for funding this project and allowing this last round of data collection in Zinakantan. Thanks so much.